Hi, everyone. Good afternoon again, and thanks for joining this panel. We're going to talk a bit about trusted messaging, fraud, and what we can do about bringing trust back into messaging. So I think Anna set the scene really well earlier today. What are the key issues that we're facing as an industry? How do we tackle this problem of trust eroding from messaging and brands moving away to other channels? The areas around how we collaborate better, how we work globally to tackle these issues rather than market by market, and how we address, this spoofing and smishing and artificially inflated traffic. So I thought to sort of set the scene, I was going to throw it to you first, Ellie. What are the challenges you're seeing? Ira. I always do that, sorry.
Hard shoes to fill.
Oh my goodness.
The microphone, sir. It's the first time I've seen you running in years.
That's so funny.
You mentioned my name. I turned off. It's fine.
Great timing. Okay, so I was going to throw the questions to you first, Ira. Just really set the scene for us. What are the challenges you're seeing? Why is it that last year when we had this panel, I threw a question at you, which was, who's to blame? And we're still kind of in the situation where we're seeing increasing intervention from regulators where they don't see the industry being proactive enough. Go for it.
So first of all, I want to thank Anna because she really pointed out a bunch of the problems that we're seeing. You asked me last year who's to blame. It's the same people who's to blame. We're all to blame. The industry makes lots of money from fraud. We're all to blame. We've been doing it for years. It's not something that just happened last year. It happened 20 years ago when we started seeing fraud. And we've all been benefiting from it. And as I said before, we pay for this wonderful venue with money from fraud. So it's something that we all have to be aware of. The problems, Anna raised a couple of the issues. One of the issues is the multifaceted aspect of trying to comply with regulations. So if you get it right in one country, it doesn't mean you can get it right in another country. And if you're going to have 200 countries with different regulations, it's going to be impossible to do. That's not even talking about when one company has multiple brands, and sometimes in different geographies they have a different name, and they have to go through vetting with different aggregators in different countries, and it's impossible for any same company to deal with that on a global basis. And if we as an industry don't find a way to have some harmonization of those requirements across every geography, it's just going to be an absolute disaster, and we're already starting to see the beginnings of that disaster. When we created this, the working group 2 years ago, we came to MEF and we said, this issue of trust, everyone's talking about it, but no one's doing anything as an industry about it. And we have to figure out how we can build a structure that everyone in the industry can follow, and then we can go to the regulators, and we can go to the big brands, and we can go to companies that are using mobile messaging and say to them, hey, this is the industry coming together, here are solutions that we're proposing. And it needs to be across the gamut of everything that's happening in mobile messaging. Anna mentioned the KYC at the endpoint, doing proper vetting at the entryway, but I'll give you an example, I think. If I'm driving up to this huge country villa, and there's like a gate post at the entrance of the drive, and they'll check to make sure that I have the right to enter into this villa. And then when I get to the door of the villa, there'll be someone at the door making sure that I'm the person who came in at the front. But no one's checking the sideways and the side paths and the side roads that go into that villa. So it's not enough for us to make sure that we have registries that register the brands at the top of the funnel or at the bottom of the funnel, that we have KYC. We make sure that in Japan everybody has a legitimate biometric picture to make sure that he's the Skype person. What about the ability to bypass that traffic, or to take the traffic off of the network, to switch it, to change it, and then to AIT, pump it, deliver it to a different number? So we have to find a way, not just at the top, but we have to find a way to protect the messaging while it's in transit, to avoid those side roads where that messaging can be altered, or can be hijacked, or can be switched, or can be sent somewhere else. And what we as an industry have to do, and the guidelines that the working group Ellie is also a prominent member on that group, have come up with, is to prevent it at all three phases, at the top, at the middle, and at the last delivery, the final delivery point. But if you ask me again, who's to blame? Sorry, but everybody in this industry has a piece in that blame.
You look like you want to say something.
Thank you very much. As usual, slightly provocative. I would clarify that there's two sides on this fraud picture. Right? One is in terms of from a kind of industry perspective, and one is very much kind of from a classic consumer scams, bad actors perspective. And really from the regulators' perspective, the regulators, they're not necessarily here to make sure that the industry is working as best as it should. That's really for us, the industry, to kind of deal with. But where the regulators get involved is when their citizen consumers, when their members of their country are being impacted by fraud and by scams and by spoofing and by everything else that happens, and it's beginning to hit them as regulators, at that point they step in. I just came off a plane, I actually came off a call on Friday where we were speaking with about 35 regulators, of which over half of them have already been imposing SMS regulation. And the amazing statement about that is that SMS in nearly all countries is not part of the regulated services, but nevertheless, the NRAs are feeling, because of the impact to their citizens consumers in terms of the fraud and the scams that are happening, they have to intervene. And therefore they are intervening, and in more countries, if we take a poll from this year compared to last year, probably 20, 30 more countries this year than where it was last year. So the work that has been going on is to ensure that as an industry we can be responding, ideally proactively, to these NRAs, to the regulators, and say, listen, we as the industry recognise the impact that this is having to the consumers and to the citizens of your country, and here are some very strong ideas centred around the concept of national registries to kind of make this happen. And this will help, when looking internationally, it will help for multinational players like Microsoft and like others to really make that happen.
Thanks. I mean, Ira, I guess you kind of touched on it when you said that we've been working at MEF for 2 years on putting together just some high-level principles. Why is it, and we all know what we need to do, why is it taking us so long?
Personally, I blame it on Ira,
because Ellie talks too much. No. The problem is that we need to get it right. And we need, Anna mentioned, we need to make sure that it's future-proof as well, not just dealing with the current problems. We had to learn what's being done in different parts of the world. For example, the TCR example in the United States, which we're real familiar with. What's happening in India, what's happening in other parts of the world where they've been doing some sort of protection for the mobile messaging. We had to make sure that we took in all of these inputs, and then we had to get consensus on what was the right way to move forward, because in the end we're an industry organization that looks for consensus. I think that what the high-level guidelines that we came out with, I think that everybody in the industry can buy into them. There's really, I like to be provocative and get people angry, but in this case I think there's everything that's in there can be easily agreed upon by everyone in the industry. The question is not going to be the people sitting in this room. The question is going to be when we go to the regulatory agencies in different parts of the world that may not yet have any system of protecting mobile messaging, or when we go to the big brands to get them to buy in, and when we go to other of the MNOs to get them to buy into some of the things that we're saying, that's going to be the issue. Can we get all of those people to agree that we have to collaborate? Anna mentioned this as well. We have to find some way of harmonizing requirements, because if every country is going to have different requirements, it's going to be a mess. How are we going to build a framework for harmonizing requirements or sharing of data, vetting data, so that Microsoft or any other big brand around the world doesn't have to go through 200 different vetting situations? So all these things were taken into account by the group. The group is a lot of people contribute a lot of their time to getting that work done, and it took 2 years to make sure that we got it right.
Anna, we're keeping up your presentation, so it must have been a really good one. Maybe you could expand a bit on that. Like from Microsoft's perspective, what is it that when you look at the industry and your pain points, what's the challenge you want to throw out to the industry? What would make life better?
what would make life better would be a universal sender ID registry, for sure. We have a number of brands that send messages that use sender IDs. Microsoft is, almost like a conglomerate. So each of the business orgs that use those sender IDs have their own carrier relations people that work with their own aggregators. And so in any given country, we may have 13 different aggregators that we work with to deliver our traffic. Some of those aggregators may cross multiple business orgs. They might register the same sender ID twice. And so managing that from an operational perspective is just so difficult. And there's rarely clarity about how blocks from sender ID registries will actually be implemented. Is it on the mobile operator to constantly query that registry and confirm? Are they actually checking that traffic came from an aggregator that's a verified aggregator for that sender? There's just so many details that often don't get considered. Every registry that I see gets better and better. The one that was that's being developed right now in Ireland is a good example of a regulator who really engages heavily with industry and finds the pain points and looks at them and has incorporated those. But it's really helpful if regulators step back and see what's the goal here and how are we going to get there in this massive industry where, we are more savvy as a sender because we also are an originating provider, but your average dentist office is not. And so I can't imagine the task of aggregators going to each and every one of their customers and getting the information they need to register them. So it's just a lot more complex than I think most regulators realize. And so having a single registry would be really helpful. And I know I'm going on and on, but it would also achieve the result of, once I've registered my sender ID, that is mine. It's a trademark, and no one else can come in and use it. Some registries are these first come, first serve registries, and it's very easy for bad actors to go in there and reserve a sender ID that looks like Microsoft and is intentionally misleading. And if there's no kind of validation behind that, the sender ID registry is essentially no good. So a universal, holistic approach would solve a lot of problems for us.
I think you're preaching to the converted here. Yeah. Claudine, maybe from your perspective.
Anna, we would love to see that. I don't know how practical it is necessarily going to be. For a brand such as Microsoft, yes, that would work. When you sort of take it down a level, even to big brands, like UK banks, for example. So let's use Barclays as an example. They would like to use, and they've registered with MEF, the Barclay sender ID. But then you have car dealerships and other legitimate businesses who want to be able to use that sender ID. So for Microsoft, it's a very known name. It's only used by Microsoft, I'm assuming. So I think there are lots of complexities further down the chain. And one of the things that we're looking at, particularly around RCS business messaging at the moment, is how it's easy to verify in the UK, and I am only speaking as a UK network, it's easy to verify the big players, the Barclays, the Microsofts, the household, the Asdas of this world. But when you get to the smaller, again, a little bit further down the chain, and you're talking about tier twos, we're actually working really hard as a group of operators to decide what that needs to look like so it is effective. And I've talked about this a lot last year about having friction in the right place. I've worked in this industry for over 2 decades. Actually, nearly 3, sadly. I've just realised that. And one of the things that I know we talked about ages and ages ago was having a global shortcode registry, and that never happens. So I don't sort of mean to be pessimistic about it, but I think it's really important that everybody, regardless of their territory, is working hard towards the same goal. And that's, what you've been talking about in the group. Ira and Ellie, we talk about this quite a lot. And as a carrier as well, we're looking at what resources have we got, what knowledge and what information have we got to bring to that, to verify. And it's not just about verifying once. it's about re-verifying brands, whether that's on SMS or RCS business messaging. You verify it, the business particularly at the very beginning, that's great, but you can't just let it run for, ad infinitum. It needs to be a process that is implemented and understood. And I think, Anna, one of the things that you referenced, I can't remember exactly what it was, but as a carrier, we have checks in place. We don't always share what those are, because if you give too much information out, obviously there's this balance, and to me it's about achieving that balance and working in a trusted environment with trusted partners to keep those partners that have not sort of proven themselves worthy of that trust at bay. I felt that was a really long-winded answer, but hopefully it answered a little bit.
I think it looks Ellie like you wanted to add a bit to that.
Yeah, keen to add. So, Anna, first of all, it would be great if we could wind the clock back 2 years and you can join the working group. That would have been a marvellous help for mankind. In terms of the nirvana, the holy grail, I'm kind of with you. I think the challenge is in 3 letters. The challenge is that very often the group of regulators are known as NRAs, National Regulatory Authorities, and sadly the key word there is the national bit. So when you're engaging with regulators, their view is at the national perspective. Now, however, we recognise this, and therefore the chance of there being creating one global registry which all the regulators are going to be kind of comfortable with engaging with is, let's call it a slight challenge. We could go via the UN. That might be an interesting twist of life if we have a few generations spare, but we don't, because we need to restore trust in communications today, not in 200 years' time. However, what we have done at the MEF Trust and Messaging Working Group is to say that whilst we recognise, due to the national regulatory authorities, we want to create a world of international cooperation between the national registry. So recognising there's 2 or 3 key functions that can be done and can be not forced on, but kind of encouraged for collaboration between the national registries for the benefit of multinational players such as yourselves as a brand, such as A2P players, such as even global operators. So wherever possible, wherever possible, to see what elements can be done on a global basis. I'll give you 2 or 3 examples what is currently captured in the high-level principles. So number 1, from a negative perspective, is data sharing around fraud information. So where you identify there's a bad actor, or there's a bad set of phone numbers, or there's a bad set of call to actions, URLs, etc. So where it is feasible and permissible for that information to be shared across national boundaries, then one should do so in order that therefore you can benefit from all national registries being able to access this information. The good news on that side is that more and more government level, law level, is recognising that sometimes areas like GDPR and other privacy are impacting on the ability for the industry to respond on that fraud side, and they're recognising that it might need some legislation changes. So the good news is the direction of travel for sharing on an international basis information around fraud is going in the right way. It doesn't mean it's going to be solved tomorrow morning, it's going in the right way. So that's one area. And the second area, just to highlight very briefly, is that the concept of sharing onboarding credentials. So if you, as Microsoft, let's say your headquarters, I'm assuming, is somewhere in the USA, right, and therefore you've gone through a process, I'm going to loosely say USA. That's obviously not so easy because you've got 3 different registries in the USA alone. Your short code registry, RBM process, and 10 DLC. But let's assume there was at some point in one registry, then the ability for that onboarding information to be shared, again, within legislation environments, to such that that can be shared across other national registries, and you won't have to go through that challenging process of 220 countries, etc. So these are some of the principles that we've helped highlight. None of this is trivial, none of this is easy. I think it provides very much a direction going forward, and because we've got so many different countries now looking to adopt national registries, so the time is now for the industry to be giving these recommendations to take that forward.
Thanks. A lot to chew on, right? Is there, and this is to any of you, is there sort of a short, mid, and long-term approach we can take? Because it could be, it sounds like what we're suggesting is a kind of registry of registries, right? Like that would be your international global registry, one that would take all the national level registries and somehow harmonize them. But that could take forever.
That's the long term. That's
Yeah.
the long term.
Right. So what can we do, Ira, since you made the comment, what can we do short term or mid term?
One of the things that we're proposing is that MEF, as a global organization that collaborates with operators and with brands and with aggregators, takes the lead on this and creates a sort of global registry. It won't be a global place, a place to share information. It's not going to be mandatory that to register your brand, you have to go to the global registry, but the information that Ellie mentioned to be shared across the right place in the ecosystem. So that's a short-term approach. Obviously, the best-term approach would be for all the regulators in the world to sit in a room and say, okay, we have to collaborate. Ellie mentioned the UN. I don't have a lot of faith in the UN. I don't have a lot of faith in, I don't think the GSMA can do it either. Somebody has to be proactive in the industry, say, okay, Anna said that this terrible regulation of trust and messaging. We came 2 years ago and we saw that was happening and we said we have to do something now. It took us 2 years to do the now. But now that we see a way forward, we have to be proactive and do it. And if we don't do it, people in this room don't do it, it's not going to happen. And then they'll have a problem. They'll lose their SMS traffic. Microsoft will find other solutions, and AIT will run rampant as it's running rampant now. So we have to look at ways that we can rebuild the trust of the consumer, that we can protect businesses, and that we have a livelihood going forward, because the livelihood is in danger.
And I found it really interesting, and like you mentioned in your presentation, that SMS is still the go-to channel for Microsoft. And increasingly, as Iris just pointed out, like we just saw an announcement last week from Google saying they're moving to some sort of QR code for two-factor authentication. We know that lots of, Meta and others, Amazon, Apple, are looking at other channels for 2FA. And this is still would not be the preferred approach for Microsoft, though.
It would be our preferred approach, but our customers do not. I mean, we have an authenticator app. It is far more secure than sending two-factor authentication codes. And so we push our customers heavily to move to that, but they continue to really prefer getting it over SMS.
Yeah.
Do you ask them if they would like to get it on WhatsApp or other channels? Or?
We have just recently started implementing WhatsApp and RCS. It's a really new development for our identity team, and it's only occurring in certain limited markets where the cost of SMS is really high, and so the operational costs of enabling WhatsApp and RCS is kind of justified there, but we're certainly open to expanding that out if there's a desire.
One bit of positive news I would say is that in the past probably a year, perhaps even a bit less, half a year, there's actually been quite a lot of work being done at the international standards organisations, such as IETF, W3C, etc., on creating the concept of a organisational identity. In fact, our parent company, Somos, has been very much involved in helping to drive some of those international standards forward. The benefit of this concept is that you'll have an international standard that will underpin as a foundation of the concept of an organizational identity. So imagine you, Microsoft, you would own this token would encapsulate Microsoft, the brand, Microsoft, the sender IDs, Microsoft, the logo, and that can therefore be bought as a token, which will be created for a certificate, whether onto the messaging side or even onto the voice side, to be able to deliver ultimately a trusted message or a trusted call. So the good work here is that it's not only work of the industry here, but also work of the standards bodies, which are looking to try and help provide the secure foundations for what will be an open standards process for organizational identity.
Yeah.
You know, I'll talk about that. I mentioned this actually, I think, last year too. There are international standards that protect traffic all the time. There's international standards that protect mobile payments. It's secure encryption. Everybody buys things online. That traffic is encrypted. It verifies the sender. It verifies the brand that's selling the thing. It makes sure that the money is deposited into a secure vault as it goes through the internet until it gets to the person who's selling the product. Our RBN now has a sort of similar secure network in order to verified senders. There's no reason why we can't create the same sort of thing here. I mentioned to Anna before, and not only will it help prevent the hijacking or the bypassing of the traffic while it's in the network, it also will serve to prevent AIT. Because if some hacker tries to send Microsoft lots of OTP requests, and Microsoft then encrypts that traffic, the hijacker can't take that traffic off of the network because it doesn't know where it's going. It won't go to its number that it wanted the traffic to be sent to. And so by making sure that we're protecting the traffic in transit, we'll be preventing not only the bypassing, the hijacking of the traffic, we're preventing impersonation by having great sender registries, but we can still impersonate the Microsoft if I hijack that in the middle. And it'll also prevent IATs to some extent. So I think that, again, we have to look at all three stages, the KYC at the top and the bottom, and the middle. And we as an industry, this is something that can be done today. There are systems in place that can be taken by this industry and used today. It's not something, that's not a long-distance approach. That's something that can be done tomorrow.
Yeah, I agree. And we just need more collaboration. I'm just looking at the time. We have a few minutes left. I'd like to know if there's any questions in the audience. No?
They were in shock.
There we go, yeah.
I couldn't resist. So hello, Marcia. I'm part of MEF. But my question is predominantly when it comes to anti-fraud. We have two groups. The group that is looking to combat fraud, and the group that says, yes, 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 we want to combat fraud, but we cannot afford to combat fraud. Because fundamentally, the business models of many organizations, operators, depend on getting this fraud traffic in order for a salesperson and the company to hit the yearly numbers and targets. So which manager out there of a company would say, or go to the board and say, you know what we've been showing as numbers, they're going to be halved starting now. So we want to combat fraud, but we are not enabling companies in a way to truly combat fraud without creating this other problem. So I would like to hear what are your thoughts of actually dealing with this situation. It's almost like a chicken and an egg, isn't it?
So this is a very delicate question, right? Like you pointed out before, that maybe the room that we're standing in here has been sponsored by some of that money. There's no easy answer. I would say two quick points. Number one is, if we don't do anything, then we as an industry will implode, number one. Number two, if we don't do anything, then the regulators will take a harsher and harsher line with us. There's already 45 countries that have implemented guidance and obligations that are quite severely restrictive by the regulators on the industry. And again, if we do not do something, we do not be proactive, then either us as an industry will implode or the regulators will come take that on us. So this is an opportunity. It requires brave people, both on the mobile operator side. We have Claudine in the room. I think you'll class her as brave. And at the same time, we have those A2Ps, those aggregators who have the long-term vision of what needs to be done for the industry to restore the trust. Let's hope that sensible view of life, the long-term vision of life, will give us the foundations for restoring trust in messaging and voice.
Oh, maybe those are good answer. I'm going to add to that. The growth of AIT didn't happen by coincidence. It happened because somebody had to make their quota, and so they sold an exclusive agreement to some firewall, and that firewall then has to justify the fact that they had this agreement. They have to create traffic for it. It wasn't a coincidence. It happened more or less about the time COVID was one of those times when people needed to justify new income. And it's not a coincidence that the cost of SMS skyrocketed in parallel to the growth of AIT. Not at all a coincidence. So the part of the industry has been enabling the growth of fraud, actively enabling the growth of fraud. And you're right, those people who are making their quotas are not going to be the ones stopping it, which is why we as an industry have to put in place ways to stop it. and not look for bad actors to stop it, because they're not going to do that.
Thank you.
All right, we're out of time, but thank you everyone for your great insights. Really happy to have you here.